Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Things have really changed in the last week or so. I think it's been 7 days since I did the last update. Today is March 13th, 2020, and let's just go over the numbers really quickly. I want to point out a few things in particular, some statistics from the US, and just see where things might be headed pretty soon there. Looking at the Worldometer site now, coronavirus cases currently at 134. That's 134 reported cases. We know this is actually much higher. Deaths at 4,973. Looking at these curves real quick, you can see how quickly things have ramped up in the last few days. Here's our total cases. You just see how that's an exponential curve growing by more and more every day. Same thing with the deaths here. Now really close to 1,000 or 5,000. These numbers are really just really sobering to look at, seeing what Italy is going through there with an added 2,000 cases, 189 deaths. So Italy really is pretty much on par with China at its worst point. China was at this, when Wuhan was really exploding there in about early February, it was going through about the same numbers. But what's amazing is Italy is so much smaller than China. Italy only has a population of 60 million, so that's only 4% of the size of China, and already their numbers daily are the same as China. So that really gives you an idea of what is happening in Italy. And in fact, there's some very scary things coming from doctors and hospitals there because they're simply overloaded. They cannot take care of everyone coming in the doors. Now, we're going to take a look at specifically what Italy looked like about a week ago. Look at the numbers here. So if we click on Italy here on the Worldometer's site, we can see a graph over time of their cases. So if we look at a week ago, which would be March 6th, when I did the last video, they were at about 4,600 cases. If you go back just a few days before that, going back to February 29th, they were at 1,128 cases. So in just 13 days, in about 2 weeks, they went from 1,000 cases now to 12,000 cases. So that's the nature of exponential growth. You have a few cases over a long period of time and nothing seems to change, and then suddenly you get to 100, and then just within a few days you get to 1,000 and then 10,000. And then the deaths in Italy really are off the charts. They're much higher percentage-wise than any other country currently, and that could be due to underreporting. It could be due to the fact that there's more smokers. It could be due to the fact that they have an more elderly population. Their average age, I think, of the average citizen is 48 years old, which is slightly higher than other countries. So these all could be factors, but we can kind of get a sense of what happens when you don't make preparations, when you don't take early action to try to screen people, try to catch this thing coming in through the doors. And in fact, looking at many of the Western countries, they're all experiencing similar growth. They're just lagging behind Italy about a week. Now let's look at the US. Here in the US today, we've got 1,725 cases, which is up 400 cases from the day before. The deaths still relatively low, which is good, but it's still so early, so we can't really try to plot this thing in the future how it's going to go. But this is good that daily we're only seeing, yesterday was 8 deaths, today is 3 deaths. It likely will go up, but it seems so far that ratio is lower than Italy, which is a good thing. Now, clicking here on USA, we can take a look at that same graph over time. If you go back to that same day, about 13 days ago, you can see the cases were only 68, and now we're up to 1,300. Now, what's especially worrisome to me, looking at these cases in the United States, is if you go back to just a couple of days ago, or even today, or this would be, I guess, a couple days ago. This hasn't updated yet, but March 11th, this is 1,300 cases, and then total deaths here at 38. So those numbers are actually, sorry, let me turn my phone off here. Those numbers are very similar to Italy's numbers about 10 days ago. So Italy was at that same threshold, and then it just spiked. So again, we've said this before, there's no reason to believe that the US will not see a similar explosion in numbers and in deaths over the next 10 days or so. There's no reason to believe that. Now, it might not. It might grow slowly. There's a couple, I think, factors that make the spread in the U.S. maybe a little bit less fast. One of the things being that U.S. is not nearly as crowded, less population density, so that's going to help. The U.S. has a slightly younger population, less smokers per million than in Italy. However, there is a lot of other health issues in the United States, such as obesity, which creates cardiovascular issues. There's also higher rates of diabetes, other what they call comorbidities, or other things that will complicate people's health states and make them possibly more susceptible to getting serious illness or even having death because of contracting COVID-19. So something definitely to watch out for. So knowing these statistics now in the U.S., and I think there's a lot more awareness. I've been watching the news coming out of the U.S. There was that presidential address yesterday, which was good, talking about waiving co-pays for people who contract the disease and then have to stay in a hospital. Those are all good things. Anything that can encourage people to get tested early, that will encourage them to get treatment rather than staying at home and trying to treat themselves and possibly infecting other people as they go to work and go to school, those types of things. Those are all positive steps. But as for the individual, what is likely going to happen, what we've seen in so many countries now, and it's just repeating itself again and again and again, is that once the numbers really start jumping up, once there's hundreds of cases a day or thousands of cases a day, you just see panic. People are not used to seeing this, especially in the West. They've never experienced a pandemic before. They've never experienced a disease that's gone out so quickly and infected so many people. So that will mean panic buying. There'll be a lot of people in the stores buying, cleaners and buying, toilet paper and paper towels are already sold out in many areas. But buying those essentials, canned goods, those types of things, that's going to happen. So if you are waiting, if you still haven't prepared these things, if you're still not stocked up on food, on water, on medicine, on these essentials, now would really be a good time to do that, because it's going to be difficult, number one, to get those things, and the second thing is you don't want to be in a crowded area with people. And in these grocery stores, they're likely going to become very crowded in the next week or so. So getting in there early, trying to beat the crowds. We mentioned before that one thing that you can do that's not difficult, a simple change that you can make about your life, we said this I think maybe 10 days ago, was shopping at not peak hours. So at times when maybe the grocery store has just opened or just about to close, when you're not in contact with a lot of people, thinking about how you can lower your risk of coming into contact with lots of people is something that's going to be very important now, but also in the weeks and possibly months to come. The next thing I wanted to go over here was an article that was really interesting, and it has to do with the aerosolization of this virus, and also some things to think about when it comes to circulated air, air conditioning, HVAC. What I will say is, before we look at this article, there is still a lot of point-counterpoint going back and forth between how this thing circulates in closed environments, in environments that have air conditioning. But I think at this point, since we don't have a definitive answer, it's good to err on the side of caution, and this is going to impact likely the way you live and maybe even the way you shop and where you shop. So I want to take a look at this article and just present you with the way it's reported here, and then allow you to make your own decisions. So the article that we're looking at here is coming from the South China Morning Post. This is a Hong Kong-based news organization, English only newspaper. I look at it often because I feel like a lot of the information that comes out here is coming from the Chinese scientists on the front line studying this thing, and they have so much data on the coronavirus, and then these reports kind of trickle out to Western media, usually sometimes a week or 2 weeks. Maybe it'll be shorter because people are paying more attention to this in the future. But I want to take a look at this article. The title of the article here: Coronavirus can travel twice as far as official safe distance and stay in air for 30 minutes, Chinese study finds. I'm going to pretty much just be reading through this article. I'll post a link to it. You can read it yourself. I think this is important information to keep in mind. So here's the two takeaways from this article. Authorities advise people to stay 1.2 meters apart, 1.2 meters apart, but researchers found that a bus passenger inflicted fellow travelers sitting 4.5 meters away. The scientists behind the research said their investigation also highlighted the importance of wearing face masks because of the length of time it can linger. All right, so let's go down and take a look at this article, it says here the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 can linger in the air for at least 30 minutes and travel up to 4.5 meters, further than the safe distance advised by health authorities around the world. So we watched a video recently that I'd critiqued here about, you don't need to wear a face mask, you just keep a distance from a person about, arm's length, and that's enough. But here we're seeing evidence that's saying no, it goes a lot farther than that. So this is why, again, self-isolation is so important. This is why China had said, just keep everyone in their homes. We don't know exactly how far this thing can spread. We don't know how small the particles it can float around in are. So just isolate. That's the best way to keep yourself safe. And it still is. That's the same best way to keep yourself safe anywhere else. Researchers also found that it can last for days on a surface where respiratory droplets land. We've mentioned that here before. The length of time it lasts on a surface depends on factors such as temperature, the type of surface. For example, at 37 degrees Celsius, 98 Fahrenheit, it can survive for 2 or 3 days on glass, fabric, metal, plastic. There are several different reports coming out. There's a recent study that came out, I think, today in the US that was also doing similar tests. And they give varying amounts of time. Some say 48 hours, some say a couple of days. The longest one was 9 days. But regardless of what the specific time is, this just emphasizes the need that it's not just about washing your hands. You have to disinfect surfaces. Disinfecting surfaces in the homes, disinfecting surfaces that you touch when you're out and about, disinfecting car surfaces, your steering wheel, your dashboard, your car handles. The virus can live on these surfaces for a long time, so we have to put up additional barriers to protect ourselves. Good, washing your hands is going to be helpful, but you can't wash your hands every 10 seconds. So you've got to just disinfect as much as you possibly can. You might also remember that previously in a video we talked about when we buy groceries from outside, when we get deliveries from outside, we disinfect every single thing that comes in through our door. At the time, that seemed like maybe that was a little bit overboard, but now I'm really glad that we did it, because obviously now this data is coming out saying, yes, it can survive on these surfaces. So something to keep in mind, grocery shopping, you might want to wipe down all your groceries. Okay, let's keep going. So this is where they get into the study here. The work was based on a local outbreak case on January 22 during the peak Lunar New Year travel season. This is in Wuhan. A passenger known as A boarded a fully booked long-distance coach and settled down on the second row from the back. So there's a diagram here that shows this is the person that was originally infected, the initial carrier, and these are all the people that were infected from this one person. How did they know? How can they be sure? Well, it comes down to surveillance. It says here, the next paragraph, the passenger already felt sick at that point, but it was before China had declared the coronavirus outbreak a national crisis, so they did not wear a mask, nor did most of the passengers on the 48-seat bus. China requires closed-circuit television cameras to be installed on all long-distance buses, which provided valuable footage for researchers to reconstruct the spread of the virus on the bus, whose windows were all closed. This is also something very important. Shortly after Wuhan was closed, and shortly after all of China basically went on lockdown, there were a bunch of sort of PSAs that went out on closed-circuit television and on on the news, on everywhere. We were getting this information. One of the things was open your windows if you're driving, and also all buses that were still running, they opened their windows. Because at the time they kind of suspected this was the case, that people were getting it from this closed air. So something to keep in mind there in the United States. It can be confirmed that in a closed environment with air conditioning, the transmission distance of the new coronavirus will exceed the commonly recognized safe distance, the researchers wrote. So what can help spread the disease? Well, closed air. Air conditioning, they believe, also can contribute to the spread. It goes on. The paper also highlighted the risk that the virus could remain afloat even after the carrier had left the bus. Well, how do they know that? Well, because, going back to this diagram, this person here in the pink, they were infected 30 minutes after the initial carrier left the bus. So that virus was still in the air 30 minutes after. Now, I will say, just as a counterpoint to this, when you look at where this person was sitting, it's possible that this initial carrier coughed on their hand, touched the seat of that other person, and then got off the bus. So when I looked at this article, I said, you can't be 100% sure that this is saying that absolutely sure the viruses were in the air at that point because it could have been on the seat. This was the conclusion they raised. To me, there's still a little bit of wiggle room there to make another interpretation. But in any case, this is what is being stated here. So the conclusion is our advice is to wear a face mask all the way through the bus ride, and that would include, I think pretty much at this point anywhere you go. Just if you've got one, wear a face mask. Why take the chance? You know it's in the air. Why take the chance? So going on here, it says those included, in other words, the ones that are infected, not only people sitting relatively close to patient 0, but also a couple of victims 6 rows away from him, roughly 4.5 meters away, which is about 15 feet. They all later tested positive, including one passenger who displayed no symptoms of the disease. And interesting here, another conclusion they drew from this, which is interesting, the researchers also found that none of the passengers in the 2 buses who wore face masks were infected. They said it vindicated the decision to ask people to wear a face mask in public. I think that's common sense. And then it goes on. When riding in closed public transportation such as subways, cars, planes, etc., you should wear a mask at all the time, and at the same time minimize the contact between your hands and public areas and avoid touching your face before cleaning. So they believe that, again, the air conditioning can keep that virus in the air longer. Now, I did some extra research on that because I was curious about this idea of the virus traveling through air ducts, or can, the problem being exacerbated by the fact that the air conditioning is on. And I also found this article, and I'm going to share it with you, and I'm also going to, again, bring out some counterpoints to this argument because there's still some disagreement. There isn't universal agreement on whether or not the virus can actually travel through air ducts, through an air conditioning system. But according to this study here, scientists in Singapore may have found a clue as to how so many people aboard the cruise ship the Diamond Princess ended up getting infected with COVID-19. It appears the virus might be able to spread through air conditioning systems. How did they find that out? Well, the article says, just over a month ago, samples were taken from 3 isolation rooms at an outbreak center in Singapore. 2 of the rooms had their samples taken after routine cleaning. They consistently tested negative for SARS-CoV-2. This is the virus, the actual virus that causes the disease of COVID. The 3rd room, however, had samples taken before cleaning and it tested positive. 13 out of the 15 spots in the room had positive test results for the virus, including air outlet fans. So that's something that stood out to me. It's not the intake fans, it was the outlet fan. So is it possible that the virus is floating through these air conditioning systems? Is it possible that on the Diamond Princess, that virus, the droplet particles were going through the air conditioning system and infecting people in other closed cabins? Possible. It also seems to be supported by the evidence here coming out of Singapore where they found traces of the virus on air conditioning vents. We don't know. Now, as a counterpoint to this, there are other scientists that have come out and said, no, this is not conclusive because someone could have coughed and it could have gotten onto that vent. And I take that counterpoint as valid. I think that is possibly an explanation for this. But either way, I think the reason I'm sharing all this information with you is to highlight a couple of risks. Number one is, again, we've said this again and again, if you're going to go grocery shopping, be wary of the times you go. They have air conditioning systems that could be circulating infected air, so it's best to go at a time when it's not peak traffic. This is a simple thing that you can do to protect yourself. Also, in the future, in the near future, as hospitals begin to fill up there in the United States, it may become necessary for you to have people in the home that are quarantined, family members that have the virus, maybe they're mild symptoms. You need to keep them in an environment that they're not going to get other people sick. I've mentioned that in previous videos. That means eating separately, using a separate bathroom if possible, disinfecting things often, and now it might also mean taping air vents if you're on a central air and heating system there. Because it seems as if there is some evidence to suggest that their droplet, these small aerosolized particles, could be circulating through the air vents and maybe getting people in the home sick. So just something to keep in mind. Again, I don't want to say that this is conclusive. It isn't. There's still, I think, a little bit of room here to say that this is not the only explanation for the data. However, it's just something to keep in mind. If you want to cover all your bases and you're there in the United States and you have someone in the home that is sick, this is something you might want to keep in mind. One thing that I've told friends recently, and I've been on a lot of calls with friends and family in the U.S., in Korea, and even in Japan, talking to different people. And one thing that's really so important, and that really seems to be proving effective, is this idea of adding layers to protection. So there's little things that we can do to boost or to reduce the likelihood of contracting this and giving it to others. Washing your hands is one of the simplest ones. Disinfecting surfaces would be another one. Wearing a face mask while out in public would be another layer of protection. Doing something like taping down the air vents in your home if you have someone that is showing symptoms. All these little things by themselves will not guarantee complete health, will not guarantee that you won't get this, but they will reduce the chance of infection. And at this point, that's really something that we all need to be thinking about, is how we can reduce the risk of getting this, and not just for ourselves, but for others around us. We don't want to be asymptomatic spreaders of this disease. We don't want to be showing no signs of a cough or a fever, but unwittingly breathing and coughing on other people or touching them and getting them sick. So all of these things are going to require every single person, to take note of to make this a successful containment of the disease. What you want to avoid is what's happening there in Italy, where the numbers are just so astronomical that the hospitals cannot care for everyone, and now the doctors and nurses are getting sick, and there's no one to take care of them. That's a very, very scary scenario. It could mean the collapse of a healthcare system. So, everything that you can do at this point is going to help you. It's going to be, I think, a pretty telling and maybe even scary week or 2 weeks there in the United States as this really picks up. So again, just as a review of what we went over today, now's the time to think about stocking up. Once the panic sets in, as we've seen in other countries, it's going to be hard and actually dangerous to get your groceries because there's going to be so many people there and we just don't know who has this at this point. So that would include food, water, essentials, canned goods, and also medicine. If you have family members that need regular medicine, now would be the time to get that from the pharmacy rather than waiting when everyone is in those areas buying things. And then secondly, looking at this data, if this is pointing in the right direction, then we want to be careful of air conditioning vents. And if we have someone sick in the home, we would want to consider taping over those vents if you're on a central AC situation. So that's it for today. Hopefully this was helpful. We're thinking of all you in the United States as this really ramps up there and hoping that you all are going to be safe. So please stay healthy, take precautions, and we'll see you next time.